All right, Adam Young, thanks for joining us in Grimerica. How you doing?
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Yeah, this will be fun. We've you're going to be presenting at Cosmic Summit, so we thought we'd have a couple of people on from the Cosmic Summit and sort of a tease what's going to be there. And of course, we've talked to Ben about some of these vases, and your name's popped up a couple times. So it's going to be great to talk to you and get a little in depth about these vases. I mean, what an exciting time to be researching all this stuff. It really does feel like the dam is breaking, and you're a part of that. So thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for everyone that actually finds this as interesting as we do. It's been a number of years that we've been focused on this, and it's only in the last few that the technology's evolved and the interest level has kind of kept pace with that. So, yeah, it does seem like the dam's kind of maybe slowly breaking, but definitely breaking.
What technology has changed to allow this to come out?
Well, like the scanning technology, the precision and the accuracy that you can get, and what sort of technology that involves. So in the beginning, it was laser and structured light. Photogrammetry wasn't quite there yet. And now it's evolved where photogrammetry can actually get super accurate and super precise. We started using CT scanning or X-ray technology, but realized that that might not be ideal because it was capturing points like within the actual walls in the body. And then how do you remove that data? Do you want to remove that data? So things are moving at a quick pace, and I think the next 5-10 years will be even faster. It'll be to the point where you can reach into your pocket and throw up some drones and they'll scan the entire pyramid from the inside out. And, you know, so sci-fi type stuff.
Yeah, that's great. Kyle was doing, some stuff with his phone. I mean, even just the latest iPhones have some pretty good capabilities when it comes to like 3D modeling and stuff.
Yeah.
The LiDAR, but the only problem with that is it's still never going to get us inside them other rocks, like don't we have the stuff where we can like scan that shit so there's other chambers? Like I want to know exactly what's going on underneath all them rocks.
You're talking about the muon technology in the pyramid?
Oh, I don't know what I'm talking about. I just feel like there's a bunch of stuff going on there. Like I was just listening to Christopher Dunset talk about, well, we don't even know how wide those blocks that are like making up the walls of the king's chamber, we don't even know how thick they are. He's like, we can make some assumptions that they're about 13 feet thick, but we have no idea. And it's like, so what's behind that then? Because there's a lot of space between the outside. Even if that thing's 20 feet thick, there's still like 100 feet between that and the edge of the pyramid where there could be other stuff, or like, can we see that? Would we be able to tell if that was going on?
I guess you would need the same sort of technology that the Scan Pyramids project put in place, the muon technology, right? That it just takes a long time. I think it takes months to collect enough samples from one specific angle, and then they piece it all together over the course of years. So one day, I guess, but yeah, who knows? There's probably countless chambers, and we don't even know the exact dimensions of the interior.
Is that the one that found a couple years ago? It found that hidden chamber in there. Is that the technology that found that, and it was kind of made some headlines for a while there?
Yeah, I think so. I think they're still working. When we were just there in March, we saw it set up, and I think it was in Minkari's pyramid, the smaller one to the side. They were set up in there, so I know they moved their collector dishes or whatever those devices are called around.
Wow, interesting. So what got you interested in all this? Like going back, like let's talk about you a little bit and your journey to this.
Sure. Yeah. I've been interested in ancient stuff my whole life, and probably when I was younger, I kind of discounted the traditional paradigm. I was never religious. I didn't really care for the traditional history that we were forced to learn. But I remember even as a child reading about the ancient Egyptians for, half a second, and then it was on to Rome. And it seemed to me like, well, it was 3,000 or 4,000 years. And we talked about it for 2 days and never really learned it. And plus there's all these animal headed gods. What's going on here? Is it even worth following up with? And then only years later did I start to hear things from, John Anthony West and others, and Robert Schoch in the early 2000s, that it kind of struck me as like, there's something more to this story here. And my wife and I went to Egypt after we had looked at these sort of granite objects or these precise objects and actually collected a few of them just out of curiosity, and met Robert Schoch in Egypt in, I think, 2015 or 16. And that was when I finally started putting more time and effort into it, and kind of establishing like a method to analyze the stuff and push it forward.
How did you find out the granite objects at the beginning?
I think
like it wasn't really was it around still back? I guess it would have been. I guess people have been talking about it on and off for a long time.
I had seen a few people discuss it. It's not, it wasn't. It was something that a number of people, even going back as far as Petrie in the late 1800s, had discussed it. These remarkable. Petrie actually thought I think a foreign invasion from Libya had brought these objects in because they were so different than anything else he had seen.
Wow.
Yeah. So everything had been wrong, from the dating to the speculative, the manufacturing techniques that people speculated about. But when I first heard about it, I thought, wow, I mean, is anyone doing any analysis here? And the answer is like, no, because they're in museums, and museums don't subject themselves to the whims of geologists. They're not going to turn over their collections to engineers or anybody that wants to scan them. We know who made these and when. So what does anybody care, right? And I sort of understood that, but then realized you can go online and there's private art dealers that are selling these things in like every country, like they're all over the place. And so I just started kind of collecting them as a hobby, as a novelty. And then once I realized that, okay, now we have enough where we can actually start to do some real work, I started down that path, and then met up with and linked up with others like Chris Dunn and his son Alex, and other people that were also, pretty, I would say, like-minded, but also really just obsessed with figuring it out or finding something. Everybody kind of wants a truth somewhere. And then later, a couple of years ago, actually, we met up with Ben from Uncharted X, and it seemed that unbeknownst to me at the time, he had also been calling for the same sorts of work and analytics to be done. And it kind of sort of spiraled from there. And there's been a whole bunch of interest that we never saw before.
You're muted, Graham.
Let's take a look at your slides. Yeah.
I feel like if it wasn't for the internet, man, none of this shit would have ever come out. We've never known any of it. Like the early YouTube days and stuff like that. Like, how do you even find out about John Anthony West? I guess there was like, where did Magical Egypt come on? Where did I first see Magical Egypt? Maybe that wasn't on YouTube. Was that like,
I think it was VHS? I think
he had VHS, and then he had like an HD DVD remastered collection. So this was going back.
But it wasn't, so that wasn't ever on like TV or cable television. So I must have seen that on the internet then. It must have been an internet thing.
No, I think cable would have showed some channels would have maybe posted that. Like,
yeah, like maybe Discovery Channel in the middle of the night, or History Channel. I mean, History Channel had some shit of aliens killing the dinosaurs with lasers. So I don't, that's new History Channel though.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he got his inspiration from Schwaller and Lubitz and others before him. So there have been people discussing this topic for, 100 to 200 years at least. And these granite objects were found by the early dynastics, found them and collected them. So they're pre-dynastic, they're prehistoric probably. And they've been collected and hoarded and traded and admired, right? And they've been buried with people for, I think, at least 12 to 14,000 years.
Wow. And I mean, that's pretty well accepted by the mainstream too, isn't it? I mean,
it actually is. And I wasn't sure about that for a while because I had heard these are pre-dynastic, and I'd heard from Robert Schoch had said, so many of these were found in graves in Nakada and in Nubia and Tashka and all these other places. And when I finally started trying to find evidence of it, it's very difficult because back then there was no real photographs. There were some photographs in the early 1900s, and then MIT and the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston did a sort of like a joint expedition to Nubia throughout the early 1900s. And that's where later on they went back and carbon dated some of these burials. And the carbon dates were coming back 10,000, 12,000 years ago. And this was documented as being the exact place where the granite and the stone vessels were found alongside pottery. And so that's the evidence we have. All the archaeologists say it's an established fact. We know that a lot of these are pre-dynastic. We know they're all pre-dynastic. They're all dated to being early dynastic or pre. So it's accepted by mainstream. And so I think we should accept it too. It's
exactly.
easier, right? Yeah.
So was there ever like, did you, when you first started collecting the artifacts, were you like, you know, these were made by a machine, or were like, at what point were you like, man, these are high tech?
You know, you can see it in a photograph online. Your eye can tell geometry, but it can't tell, I mean, it can't see that on the microscopic level. So it's not proven until you actually scan it or get it into some sort of measurement device where you can look at the deviation or the standard deviation from a perfect circle, for instance. And so that can be done with hand tools, can be done digitally with a scanner that creates like an STL file effectively, and you can put it into your program like Blender or any other viewer, Polyworks, and actually do the math yourself and calculate it. But you don't know exactly. And some of the other vases that are attributed to later dynastic craftsmen, some of them look pretty good too. So it's not really clear to me what tools were used, and I try to stay away from speculating like what was actually deployed. But I think you can say that their level of competency is far higher than they're given credit for. I think you can definitely say that.
Where's our competency at for something like that today?
You know, that's one of the things I will get into also. And at the Cosmic Summit, we, for the last few years, we've been trying to find craftsmen today that can actually replicate these or want to take a shot at it. And we found a few people. The precision hasn't been as high as the old stuff, but we know it's possible. The part of the problem is nobody wants to break a carbide drill tip, which are expensive. Nobody wants to, use their really expensive 5-axis CNC machine and screw up a bearing or an aperture or something. So it's not that we can't do it. It's that we probably would have to refine or reinvent the tool set to do it.
Okay, but if we went back 150 years, almost certainly not.
I would probably agree with you. I know 50 or in the early 1900s, we were making very, high precision cannon. Like, so, there's definitely the tool and the capabilities over time that can probably do this, but you also have to measure what you're doing in order to know how accurate and precise it is, right? You can't just go out and say, all right, set the machine and walk away and come back. That's notoriously imprecise. Like robots are not perfect, right? They're going to get the vibration, and whatever path they're following needs to be continuously dialed in and monitored over the course of its work. Otherwise, you're not going to achieve that accuracy or precision that you're looking for. So it's a big effort to make these things. And the fact that there's so many of them and spread so far and wide across Egypt and other places, many thousands, hundreds of thousands, probably more, kind of tells me that it was either easy or cheap to make at some point by someone.
Or important.
Yeah.
Like those dimensions are important. Like we have a question in the chats asking if any tests have been done on the insides of the vases, and he's curious if precise measurements can make them usable for methane storage or things like that. Like that's kind of the thing I got, is because when I go into those pyramids, it's like I really get this feeling that those things are machines. So it's like, did you have some sort of, is it more like a ball bearing or like bolts, or like, you're not exactly like that, but something sort of more from a utilitarian sort of standpoint than a decorative vase that just got found by these people years later, and they're like, cool, man, it's like a jerry can or something, but we're like, well,
yeah,
look at this shit.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, gas storage. I hadn't really thought of that. You could hermetically seal this with any number of like stopper type devices, I'm sure. The insides are not always as finely polished as the outsides, but sometimes they are. It seems like it seems like maintaining the width or the consistency of specific measurements, like the ratio of the interior to the exterior diameter, was really important, carrying that through. So that could have something to do with the strength or the resonant properties, if that was what these were for. I don't know. They could have been Helmholtz resonators. That's Chris Dunn has speculated that, I think, in a number of times, and it's hard. I don't really have an opinion one way or another, but if people believe these are functional, I would probably tend to agree.
Can you explain what that Helmholtz thing is that Chris Dunn says it is?
Yeah, it's like a resonator where there's a sort of like a sphere with a hole at the top, and it's meant to resonate at a specific frequency for any number of purposes. And he always thought that those sorts of resonating balls basically lined the chamber, the ascending passage into as you're walking up to the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid. I don't think he necessarily knew, or maybe he didn't speculate what they were made out of, but he said a couple of times these could have been related to that, possibly. So a way of kind of filtering out or tuning or editing frequency, audible or not.
Right. I just wonder if even people would make modern vases that accurate. Like, that's the one thing I wanted to ask you is, like, these are so accurate, like within a couple thou, which is, I don't know if that's a tolerance you would use to make like decorative vases. You know, why would you even do that? Like, if you were, you know, people say, oh, there might be modern forgeries. Like, I just don't think it's even that easy. And I don't think people would be doing it for fun.
A modern machine shop can achieve these levels of tolerances, but that's primarily in metal. So you're talking about titanium, maybe aluminum, certain types of steel alloys. That's done for aerospace functions, right? You really need to have your oxygen level at a very specific measured volume or boom. So there's certain applications today where this would make sense, but no, nobody has machining that even seeks this level of perfection. And so we actually had a granite vase made by a really skilled craftsman.
Right.
We'll discuss that. And we have the original STL file that we kind of compare both measurements, the scanned modern reproduction and the original one. And yeah, it's off by orders of magnitude. The modern one is way less. But again, it's because the technology isn't really there. We don't really have the technology today to go out and mass produce these. It would have to be a very specialized effort, or we'd have to build the tools to do it, because why, right?
Yeah, it seems to be a whole different evolution. You know, we're down a different path that we don't have. You know, we'd have to go re-engineer some things to even get started.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
If you're casting it, I guess you could sort of injection mold it or cast it or do some other weird way.
Yep. Oof, it's still pretty hard to even cast stuff that accurate, you know, unless it's like without having some pretty precise dies, then that are, you know, seems it'd be just as much of if it's cast, it's just as much, it's almost a bigger achievement to build the dies that can and liquefy, you know. Now you're liquefying granite and liquefying all these different stones and putting them into some sort of, I don't know, whatever, titanium, maybe that'll hold it, whatever. You got some sort of crazy metallurgy going on now to make some crazy mold that you can make these things out of.
And your mold would have to fit, you know, wherever the hinges are, the separation points in the mold. You have to make sure it comes together absolutely perfectly, right? There can't be any deviation, because it all, you know, 1/1000th of an inch is like, it's close to the width of a human hair, right? I don't know, human hair can vary, but that is such a ridiculously small amount of distance. You can't see it. You can only measure it.
And
so why do you need that in a vase?
And you'd feel it, right? If you're running your finger along it, would you feel a little bump of human hair? I feel like I almost would feel that.
I don't know if it's in granite, because these things are also, you know, it's polished, but they're also banged up. So when you run your hand across these, you do feel some of the damage that's been there for, you know, thousands of years of people handling and dropping them. So I don't know. It's hard to say. If it was like a groove or a divot or like run out from whatever tool they were using, maybe you could pick that up.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I was reading the Book of the Dead, and speaking of, like, when you were talking about, they acknowledge that how old these things are, and the Book of the Dead talks about how these vases. The word is thousands of vases, like from basically the early dynastic or pre-dynastic. It talks about thousands of vases in the Book of the Dead. So I mean,
Wow.
I just thought that was crazy to hear that. It talks about thousands of other things too, like it's not just the vases, but they include vases in there. So it makes you wonder if they were finding all this stuff.
What
earlier
other
on.
things are? What other things?
I'll pull it up. I'll pull it up. It'll be interesting to see.
Now I'm curious.
Yeah. And you could probably, if you want to pull up your presentation, Adam, you could, and you can show that. I think you have a picture in there of one of the vases, the top, looking down the top, with how accurate how accurate that is. So it says thousands of loaves of bread, thousands of vases of ale, thousands of linen garments, thousands of changes of wearing apparel, and thousands of oxen. And that's
So the
supposed
vases
to
would
be,
be the only thing that would still be around.
that's supposed to be from early, like first, second dynasty, I think.
Wow. And that is, you think that's related to Djoser or Zoser?
I don't know, maybe. I think it's crazy.
Yeah. There's some vacation shots if you guys want to see that.
Sure.
This is
Maybe
from like
YouTube.
2015. My wife and I underneath something, probably in a mastaba or something. This is Yusuf. Do you guys know him?
Yeah, we know you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had him on recently. Yeah, awesome.
And one of his brothers at their shop. This is Yusuf being kind of a fanboy with Robert Schock. And Mohammed Ibrahim, who's also a really accomplished Egyptologist and guide. These are some inspiration shots from the Cairo Museum, I think. And so this is like a type of gneiss, which is related to diorite. I don't know what this bottom thing looks like, only that it looks like an hors d'oeuvre tray to me. Like you put the dip in the middle and maybe, the carrots and the cucumbers around the outside. I'm like half joking because it's possible that's actually what it was. It was just milled on a 5-axis CNC machine. This is a type of siltstone, so it's almost like it's bent. It's just really incredible. The type of the planning and then the execution is like just mind blowing.
Buddy, a guy we had on
super bent.
A guy we had on recently was trying to remake those that like ashtray type thing that you saw.
Yeah.
Through what's it called, Darren, when you mix
geopolymers?
Geopolymer with natron.
Mm.
What natron is also talked about in the Book of the Dead, like really crazy. Like Green Lake, it's there was some quotes about natron in the Book of the Dead as well, which I found really interesting. It says Green Lake is the name of the other pool, a pool of natron, a pool of nitre, as others say, the traverser of millions of years is the name of one. Great Green Lake is the name of the other. So something about natron and millions of years. Interesting. But he tried to make it and he couldn't. I don't think he could do it even close, like just by bending it around in that way. And so interesting.
Yeah, some of these get just so incredibly thin. I mean, I have a few that are pretty thin. Matt Beal, if you guys are in contact with him, he's got a few that are, an 1/8 of an inch thick, the wall thickness. And it's kind of mind blowing because granite's one of the hardest substances on earth, about a 7 on the Mohs scale. And there's only a few things that cut it, like corundum, diamond would cut it. So if it's an abrasive, you create so much friction doing that I don't see how you could maintain that thickness and the tolerance and the accuracy at the same time.
Right.
And that's, I think, probably very challenging. Like, could we cut a perfect granite circle and make it down to 1,000th of an inch or 2,000th of an inch? Yeah, we probably could. But could we create these vases with the complex geometry and mathematics inside and maintain a specific thickness, like through the entire body, down as you're you're going around the spherical angles and you're maintaining the concentricity? I don't know. I don't know if we could. Someone probably could. I don't want to say we can't, but it's just something we don't do because it's too difficult. We make things out of pottery, we make things out of glass. And when we use stone, it's, the granite we cut today is for a countertop slab. We don't really create this.
Right.
So this is another picture from Cairo. I've just circled a few things just to kind of show how they tend to mix the granite in with the other objects. Like On the left side, there's a Nakata, looks like Nakata vases, I think they are, and they're pottery. It's fired clay or baked clay, generally speaking. And then they have, a diorite or a granite vessel here, which is just tremendously different. It's not even close. One's made by hand, one I don't think is. And so they, for a long time, they just sort of looped all these things in together because that's how they were dated. They were dated based on form. And this is what I mean by that. So this is Nakata. This is what Petrie was. One of the first things, or one of the things that made him famous was the excavations he did around Nakata. Nakata was a huge cemetery, so there's all sorts of people buried here: Coptic, Christians, and Romans and Greeks, and turns out, pre-dynastic Egyptians. And he excavated, I guess, hundreds or thousands of graves. And he was the first one to argue this stuff is pre-dynastic. Like, this doesn't fit any of the other things we found from early dynasties. It's just so different. I don't know the composition between pottery and like granite and the diorites and the harder stones, the igneous rock, versus the clay and the pottery. I don't know. I strongly suspect, and it seems like from what the limited photographs that are here and the descriptions, is that it was much more pottery. However, when they found granite objects, they were like the minority in a grave. There might be one or two special vases, like really impressive, and then like 20 clay pots. So it seemed to me when I heard this story, it's one of the first things I heard that got me interested in this. I said, oh, well, clearly these are like heirlooms, right? Like, otherwise, why wouldn't you make all of them out of granite? Well, you couldn't because it was too difficult. Why was it seems like a matriarch, a patriarch, a wealthy or established person was buried with like one of these special vases, but then they were all buried with the pottery. So it seemed to me like these things were found by these people. And you can see from the burial, these weren't mummified. These are old graves, way before Egypt, way before dynastic Egypt. And this is kind of in the middle of the country. I just put a map there. It's near Thebes. And this is a good example of the dating based on form. So you have, Nakata 1 and Nakata 2. And so these epochs are separated by maybe 500 years or so, roughly. That's how they're separated anyway. And this was kind of established based on the way the pottery was constructed, but then they used the same rules and tried to apply it to stone. So what do we have here? We have 3 on the left and 3 on the right. And so this time period is supposed to be separated by what? Like, I guess 500 years, maybe 1,000 years. So you're telling me that it took them 500 or 1,000 years to get from the left side to the right side? Like, does that make sense? Could someone sit there and play with basalt for 1,000 years? How many skilled craftsmen? Like, if they work for 20 years, okay, it's 50 generations. And what did they achieve? Well, they cut off the base and they made it a little more geometric in 1,000 years. Like, what society works on a single project for 1,000 years and like this is the fruit of their labor?
Yeah,
It doesn't really make sense to me. Like, that's like a crazy motivation, I guess.
they look very symmetrical too compared to the other ones.
Yeah, these are the ones on the right are far more symmetrical.
So is that timeline question? Do you think that's Dynasty 1, and then the other one is?
Well, I don't think it really makes sense for a number of reasons, but also you would see if they were laser focused on trying to figure out how to make these basalt vessels for 1,000 years, you'd find tons of them everywhere. You'd find the job outs, right? The cast offs. Oops, fucked up, throw it over your shoulder. And you just find like broken pieces. These are some of the most rarest type of stone vessels as the basalts. They're rarely found. And you actually don't see these all that often on like our brokers and other dealers. Like they're just not as common as the other stones. And so if a culture was focused on something for 1,000 years, I just think you'd see more evidence of it.
Yeah.
And I think they would make it a little bit further than just the difference here.
Yeah.
But that's an example. Here's another example. These are all very similar looking, but look at the one in the middle. B is travertine. That's way softer than granite, gneiss, or diorite. Gneiss and diorite are basically about the same. Travertine is a lot softer, and they're all dated for the exact same time period, even though this would have been significantly different process and different tools that would have been used. So I would stand to reckon that, maybe if you believe that the time period in which the technology was present is going to be when these were made. Like if we could only work in granite during a certain period of time, then that's when the granite things come from. Well, they just dated these all the same. They, irrespective of the, of the hardness or of the material. And this is a method. This is like dating on form. It's called. But this is Nubia. So this is.
But even if that softer stone has the same accuracy, it's still outside of their level of achievement. It should be, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. We what
You
I've been.
you don't know the accuracy on those, do you?
Well, I don't know that one. I don't know those 4 right there. Those are, I think they're at the. They're in Chicago at a museum in Chicago, I think. But I don't know the accuracy of that one. No, we haven't looked at too many travertine or limestones or alabaster are also pretty soft. We haven't looked at them because I wanted to focus on the stuff that was the hardest.
Yeah.
And most difficult. I mean, hardest stone, most difficult to do, which is like the granites. So those are the main focus. I don't know. I think we probably would find some that are accurate, but the stone is a lot softer, so it is possible to do those by hand.
Right. Okay.
At least cut them.
Yeah.
So this is Nubia. This is early and then into the mid 1900s, as late as like the 1960s. Some work was done here. Nubia is like all of southern Egypt. They call it Upper Egypt, and then it goes into Sudan. So Nubia are places. Ben from Uncharted X has talked about this a lot. Tashka. So some of these areas were flooded when the dam was built and Lake Nasser was filled up, and so I don't know if they if it was foresight, but at some point a lot of excavations happened down here. So this is what a grave looked like. Same thing that we kind of saw in Nakata, which was you saw a mix of different types of materials in graves that appear to be much older. Why? Well, they're not mummified. They're just kind of placed in here organically, like they may have been an embrace with another body. Usually there's more of like a nature connection and not the religion of the dynastic Egyptians. So these are old and they were dated. Excuse me. Some of these have been dated based on carbon remains that were extracted in the early 1960s to be up to 10 or 12,000 BC. Here's a kind of evidence of this. 14,500, 12,000 years ago, which is 10 to 12.
Wow.
500. Tashka.
Huh.
So this is a funny picture. there's some black and white pictures where it almost looks like there's stuff like popping out of the ground, as if there's like just these burials were just everywhere, like literally everywhere. There's bowls like sticking out of the sand. So there was so much material at these sites. Tashka's like one area, and there was dozens or hundreds of excavations done in the entire Nubian geography. That it makes sense that ancient people were collecting these things. They were literally everywhere. And this is Saqqara. So Saqqara is near Giza. It's near Cairo. It's a few miles actually. It's not that far. And this is a museum there, kind of at the base of the Step Pyramid, and it's dedicated to Imhotep. So Imhotep and Zoser were, I think, 3rd dynasty. So maybe around 2800 BC. I don't know exactly, but Djoser was pharaoh or king, and Imhotep was kind of like his Leonardo da Vinci. He was like his head architect. And together, these two guys, I think the story is that they were effectively like Indiana Jonesing it. They were going around the country, finding all these artifacts, collecting things. They were probably scratching their head half the time, oh my God, like how the hell was this made? And it seems like they were experimenting too. Like the Step Pyramid may have been partially or fully reconstructed by Imhotep to try to get it to work again. If they found it sort of like Abu Rawash style, where it's like just bombed out, or if it's almost like the foundation is there and like the body of the building is gone, how did this thing used to work? Can we reconstruct it? That's the vibe that I got from there. And this was excavated by Lauer. And so Lauer was here later. He was here in like, I think the 1920s and 30s. And he stepped in and he found in one place, he found 40,000 of these. And that's just in the rooms that were not caved in.
Wow, that's crazy.
Here's a little description on the left side. gallery under the step pyramid filled with vases that had been crushed by the collapsed ceiling. So the accounts are that the 40,000 came out of a room. They were in boxes, and then there were several other rooms with where the ceiling had collapsed. So what does that mean? Does that mean that there was 80,000, 120? I don't know. And then this on the right is an explanation of how they think they're made. And this is, I think this is total nonsense. This is potentially for alabaster, maybe.
So there's 40,000 of those things floating around in private collections.
Right. So one guy in this time period pulled these out. One person. And they just, poof, they probably went everywhere. So the ones that I have were basically, a lot of them were probably from here, and they were exported by people that worked for the government. They were diplomats. They were giving them as gifts. They bought them in antiquity stores in Cairo. And then much later, Egypt put in place a series of treaties so that these things would stop being exported. But if you own them and they were exported before the treaties, it's perfectly legal. So this one basically it's a mix. You can see there's all different types here. Now, I can see alabasters in the background. I can see granite, diorite. I can see porphyry. These big ones are porphyry in the center. Some gneiss, and this stuff varies in hardness. But it was all found together, and it sounds like Djoser, and this is kind of accepted that these were like funerary objects. This is what the traditional explanation is. Djoser was interred at Saqqara, even though his body was never found. They suspect he was buried there with 40, 80, or 120,000 of these. Really? No other king in Egypt was ever buried with anything remotely close to this. So
why you're like, hey man, make sure you bury me with my pottery collection.
Yeah. No, I need more.
No more, all of it.
Not
all
enough.
that pottery, bro.
Get back out there and come back with more. It doesn't make sense to me. I think this was a storage facility, or he was repurposing the step pyramid, parts of it, as a warehouse for his own personal private art collection. So I get into it a little bit. I heard this. This is another kind of turning point in my life when I heard this. I'm like, there's no way. And how long did these take? And I think it was, again, Robert Schock or someone that said, oh, well, they could have taken anywhere from like 2 to 5 years, maybe even longer. I'm like, all right, well, if it took someone 2 years, let's just be conservative. So if it took you 2 years to make one, you're also going to have mistakes, right? And cast offs and job outs and everything else. So given that, and you have about a 20-year life cycle. I think the average age back then was in the 40s. So a master craftsman would have about 20 really good years. So you're only going to make 10 of these in your life. Okay, what's the value? One, in like US dollars or in any conceivable universe, they're expensive. I think you can say that, right? Because it just takes too long to make. Doesn't matter. And a slave isn't making these. They're skilled craftsmen. So to take 40,000 or 80 or 120,000 and stick them under the ground doesn't make sense. With no like real guards, no real protection. They weren't even particularly well buried or concealed. They were in existing tunnels. And I kind of heard that and said, okay, something's going on here. And probably the explanation is that they just were readily available, right? He didn't make them. This guy didn't commission an army of craftsmen to make all this stuff. And that's not even the traditional story. The traditional story is he found them from other earlier leaders and earlier burials, is what the traditional archaeology explanation is, because some of these were inscribed. And credit to Djoser, he didn't just graffiti over other names. He actually left them the way they were. And so we can see that some of these had the names from earlier kings on them. So here's a subset of the stone here. So granite, diorite, alabaster, porphyry, siltstone, breccia, which is kind of like a conglomerate, quartz, which is very hard, limestone, soft, and then red granite. So they picked out red granite and always called it something different than all the other granites. The other granites are like, the gray, the black, whatever. But red granite was always singled out and connected with Aswan in that quarry. Here's us from back in March. We were underneath the step pyramid, and you can see there's still pieces of these things everywhere. They're all over the ground, just piles of them. Still, which is just crazy to think about how many must have been there.
I mean, that picture looks fake.
This one was, I think, maybe filtered.
It's so good.
Yeah. This was one of the most fun.
Is that
trips I've
Abu
ever been on.
Sim?
Abu Sir, yeah.
Abu Sir.
Abu Sir, yeah.
Yeah, cool place.
I remember that. That was a good time. What
Yeah.
great setup. Good dinner.
Here's a moss scale. So this, I put in red the stuff that I like to focus on because it's a little harder. So if you look towards the left, you'll see one of the first things, the fifth one down is calcite, which is like your alabaster and your limestone. It's about a 3. So the moss scale just tells you how hard is this before something just above it will scratch or cut it, right? So something that's a 3 will only be cut or scratched by something that's a 3+, like 3.1 or whatever.
Right.
And so some of them kind of vary depending on the mineral content. So technically stone is made up of different minerals, doesn't really have a moss scale, but you could, so if we look at marble's got, it's between a 3 and a 5 because there can be mineral content in there that result in it being anything in that range. Right. And so we got, basalt is on the softer end of the igneous rocks, but it's still between a 5 and a 7. And then breccia, depending, sandstone or siltstone, diorite, gneiss, andesite, which is another type, and porphyry. Porphyry is really interesting, and I talk about that a lot in the presentation for Cosmic Summit because it's, I think, one of the most beautiful stones that you see out there. It can have these giant crystals in it, like giant quartz feldspar. A lot of times it's feldspar, which is hard as well. It's about a 6, I think. And you see these geometric shapes cut out of the stone with these huge crystals, and the curvature is consistent. No matter what the machine or whatever tool it was going through, whatever medium it was going through, it was cutting the exact same angle. So it may have been going through the base material and then hits this huge crystal and doesn't phase it, just keeps going. And I think that's equally as impressive as the accuracy, is the fact that the machine was like agnostic to some extent. We have corundum. Corundum's found in Egypt. That's a 9. Diamonds were not, at least that we know of. But corundum is almost as hard. So maybe they were using that. I don't know.
I think mine's howlite. So it's like they were just making it out of all these different rocks. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Whatever they could find a big enough chunk of, almost.
Yeah. Or
they're for different purposes. I mean, doesn't red granite and black granite and all that resonate at a different frequency too?
Yeah, well, they have different mineral composition,
Yeah.
so different, levels of quartz and iron and all that. And so some of it's more or less radioactive. Like there's all sorts of properties that we just don't know what they were using them for.
Do you ever is there any acoustic properties with yours? Do they do anything like a singing bowl does, kind of?
They all have resonant frequencies. But like almost none of them are perfect. They all have like some amount of damage. And so I don't really know what to make of, you find that was that the original note, because there's chips and things are missing and we don't know if someone else did something. Like I suspect that these little holes that are drilled in the lug handles on some of these were done later. I don't think these holes were in the lug handles originally. So that would have removed material, changed the properties. So I just don't know.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's like a broken
so they were just a lug handle without a hole, so you wouldn't put string in it or anything. It was used for some sort of locking mechanism or some sort of just handle to pick it up or something like that. Weird, eh?
Yeah. Maybe to mount it on.
Yeah.
I don't know. But it does seem like they were done later because they're much less precise. The holes that were drilled, sometimes they come in from both sides and they don't even meet perfectly in the middle. And so you see the precision and the perfection in the vase, and you're like, well, someone did this and they couldn't even drill a regular, like, short tubular drill through and get it straight. Like, come on. This is the first time I had anything done. So this was a facility up in Connecticut. They're near a defense contractor up in like Windsor, kind of near where the submarine bases are, and they had this company called GOM. They had the blue light scanner, which you see in that little red box on the right side. And this guy, I love this picture of his face because he was really a very like stoic guy, and I remember we stayed here like 8 or 9 o'clock at night one night, and he was just blown away. He's like, well, where did you get these things from? You know, like, is this a joke? Like, what is this? Because these guys are used to looking at, you know, engine manifolds and things that go on turbines and that sort of thing.
Aircraft parts and stuff that have a tolerance of 2 thou. I mean,
in metal.
Yeah, in metal. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So the tolerance is done in metal. These don't really exceed that, but they kind of match it, and it's in stone. So this is one result of, I think, that initial analysis. So this is like kind of proprietary software for that, for GOM, what's called Polyworks. But this is a flatness scan, and so you can see it's not flat. It's not flat. It's actually rounded. And so what we found is some of these vases have.
Oh wow! But it's still pretty flat. I mean, you're talking about the difference between the red and the blue is what, like a 3/1000th of an inch?
Yeah.
Or the red and the green?
Yeah, the red and the the red and 0 is like 3. So, well, what this means is that the lip has a radius on it,
and it's uniform.
And it's uniform, exactly. So every surface on this one, this was the one that Ben talked about first, and kind of was the most well-known one. It's like the red granite one.
Okay.
So this vase, and we found others like it, so it's not the only one. It's not a unicorn, but every single surface on this vase has a radius. Nothing is flat.
Wow.
Everything, even the bottom, everything has a radius, and this is like an inverted radius, right?
So even that inside diameter on the lip perpendicular to that surface there is got a radius too? Yeah.
Yes, it does. We thought that was a what's it called? We thought it was a cylinder originally, but it's not. It's actually curved. Everything is. It's
wow.
Mental. Yeah.
And it's oh my God. Okay. So that means something functional. You'd think it'd be have some sort of function thing to it.
Or you're just showing off. I don't know. I mean, it's just really difficult to think of not just how, but why. Like, why would the function necessitate we couldn't leave a single flat surface here? Like, we can't leave it flat, even if the top surface didn't have a function. Like,
and yet it's still so accurate, right? So it's not like they're, you know, that's the crazy part about it, is it's still only a couple of thousand difference between it, but it's so level, it's so uniform.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for all intents and purposes, it's flat. It's just not by some.
Exactly. Because a granite table that you're going to measure, like what's a tolerance on a granite CMM table?
Less than that.
Those CMM tables are pretty flat.
Like
maybe it's like 1/10,000th or something. I don't know if it's that tight, but it's.
Yeah.
I think it's less than 5,000. It's probably 1,000th or less. I'm not sure exactly.
Yeah.
Because
what about your counter? Your kitchen counter is not going to be close to that.
It's less, but I guess it depends on the level of polishing also, because polishing could create some deviation.
Huh.
But yeah, it's like when we make stuff today, we do things that are good enough. You know, if it's good enough, then we leave it and move on, because we like to be efficient, economical. And these people were like, no, it doesn't matter if it's good enough. I'm not leaving that lip flat. Damn it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't live with myself if I don't finish this. So this is like just kind of an explanation of how we do tolerance. Tolerance is just standard deviation. So if you have like, if you're trying to measure circularity or how round something is, and it looks really round, well, how do you measure if it really is round? Well, if we put it into, like, if you want to call it a CAD program or Blender or something like that, draw a circle over it, and then measure the difference from the points to the actual circle. And that standard deviation is your tolerance. And then your range is just how, what the dispersion is.
Yeah.
So when we look at that, here's that first one again. And so we have a couple different metrics here. And this flatness, we were looking at a specific slice. So I know it's not flat, but we were looking at almost like a band, if that makes sense. Yeah. So roundness. Look at the perpendicularity. The jar opening is almost perfectly perpendicular to 1/1000th of an inch. Cylindricity. So it's not a cylinder. That's why it's a little off here. Concentricity. So we're looking at like how kind of like different circles will align and what their difference is from a common axis.
Yeah.
And so these are all pretty tight. Lug handle. How is the lug handle parallel to? I should have put a diagram in here explaining what A and B is. But how are these things parallel? How are they perpendicular? Parallel with each other, parallel to different features of the actual vase, and you can see the numbers are all very small. So these are kind of the head turning numbers that led us to continue to do even more work on each one of these. I just meet with Chris a few years ago.
So if you measured them to hundredths of an inch, they'd all be perfect.
Yeah, I want to find another. All right, so here's an example of the different points we would be looking at. So concentricity, we might take a look at exterior, like C6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way down to see what it looks like. Sorry. And here's an example of like kind of how we would be looking at that concentricity today. So for instance, this is an old vase on the right-hand side, the bottom right chart. These are in thousandths of an inch. So it's 1.9 thousandth of an inch. So 0.0019. And then 3. So these are 1, 2, 3 thousandths of an inch. These are extremely high precision. On the left, this is the modern reproduction. 32 thousandths. So
that's the one you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, so 10 times. Wow. So 10 times more accurate in the old version. And this is what it looks like. This is what was produced by a modern machine shop or a modern stone masonry facility.
What do you know what they used as the tool? Or
they use a 3-axis tool. It looks like a lathe, and then there's a machine that kind of grinds it as a thing is
CNC lathe in a way.
Yeah, it's a CNC lathe. I don't have the specs on it, but I think I have them somewhere. And so they used red granite. And the inside, I don't have a picture of the inside, but it's just a tube drill. It's not even hollowed out. It's just a straight cylinder drop.
Interesting.
And this is what they were able to accomplish. And they tried to make it as accurate as they could. And they just said, we don't have, this is a quarry. So this is an area of China, actually. And this guy that did this, it's near like very famous granite quarries. So this is an area of China where people have been skilled in granite carving for literally thousands of years.
Right.
And everyone, it's one of the most famous granite manufacturers actually in the world. And he offered to give it a shot. And this is what he was able to do, was about 10% as accurate. So I don't know if it's anecdotal. I think it's honestly, if he had time and he was able to build better equipment or obtain it, he probably could come back, for a second pass and do better. But that's one. We have a few others that we're working on now.
So, I mean, can we get into the radial transversal patterns and stuff too? I mean, can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. This is another one.
I don't want to, give up too much, but wow, what is that device there? That's the photo.
This is photogrammetry machine. We've been using this more recently because you can dial it in pretty tight. You can get really high levels of accuracy with your scans. It's just a question of the grade of your, it's the quality of the camera, which is actually the cheapest part. And then it's how you're capturing the points. So on the right, you can see there's like well over 1,000 different points that are captured or photographs. Each photograph is going to have billions of data points, and then it's software driven. So if you have a skilled team, you can actually get it very, very precise. And this one, I wanted to show this one. So this red granite, this is a spinner. I guess we call it. Some of these spin on the bottom.
Yeah.
And so this is one of those. So it's red granite, and if you took it and spun it on a flat surface, it would basically appear like it was perfectly balanced, pretty close to perfectly balanced, not exactly.
And spin for quite a while without even touching it. I mean,
they can, yeah, depending on how much it was used. Because if people were using these in their houses, it would have been sitting on your mantle, on your stone mantle top or something, right, or on your floor or whatever. Over time, that point might flatten out. Yeah. If you can see, I took a couple of photographs of the lug handles here. Can you see that? These are like outwardly convex.
Yeah.
most of the ones we've seen, almost all of them were rounded, were toroidal, basically. So the radius of the outside of the lug handles was very similar to the body of the vessel or the vase, except this one and I think one other one. So just strange. This is, I think, part of that radial traversal pattern you were asking about.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So all it really means is that there's basically a function.
Yeah.
There's one equation or function or something that can describe how a number, maybe not all, but a lot of the radii will follow. And so one of the first ones that was identified by a gentleman named Mark Quist, and one of his research associates was in not this phase, another one. It was effectively, I think he had described it as square root of 6/2, which is the same as square root of 1.5 or 3/2, and then raised to a power of n. So n is just like an integer. So whatever you put in for n, that's going to give you another radii. And that radii can then be used in various places. And so they're all related to each other. If all the radii, if a piece is covered in circles and circles define the architecture of a piece, and they all relate to each other because their radii are basically, scaled versions of one another, that's a pretty high level of design. That's not just, it's obviously not doing it by hand, but it's also not
like that. And we don't do design like that nowadays, do we? Like if you were going to make a vase, if you're going to design a vase that looks like aesthetically pleasing but you're not going to put this type of math into the radius, right?
Not exactly, but we do things like it. Like if you're familiar with plumbing at all, if you're like downsizing like a water line from like, a 1/2 inch to 3/4 or something like that, because you're changing the pressure of like water, right? You may have like one side of a pipe at a different radius than the other, and they're related. They're related by something.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying it's the same thing here. And this is, not even necessarily for liquid, but it could be related to the function.
Yeah. Which I was going to ask you about, because I listened to you and George Howard, and Malcolm was on talking to you about this, and it was really interesting. You guys were talking about function and maybe looking at displacement and the volume being maybe important in these as well.
Yeah, he mentioned that, and I had trouble keeping up with him. He's such a brilliant guy. But yeah, he mentioned potentially the geometry was related to the volume, which is what they were trying to maintain. The volume of the volume of the material used in the vase, not just the displacement, but the actual volume of material used. I think that was his point.
Yeah.
Which goes back to how the wall thickness matters, right? Like you have to maintain something consistent because it's all related back to the volume of the amount of mass.
Yeah.
I don't have an answer for that, but it seems elegant enough to be worth pursuing.
Yeah, it's already so elegant that wouldn't be a stretch after seeing all this.
Yeah. He's on another level than me, though, so I'm not sure I'll necessarily follow his math for a while, but I've looked into his theory and read his notes, and it's certainly kind of makes sense from a comprehensive point of view.
Yeah, it's just like he's saying stuff that sort of to me. It matches. I don't know if you've heard Terrence Howard on JRE.
Yeah.
If you heard that whole thing, but I mean, he's saying stuff that seems to match what he's saying. I mean, changing volume changes energy, so it's quite fascinating. I think he was trying to describe transmutation there. Like if you change volume of something, it'll create a space for energy to happen. It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I can't picture though how that would. I can't picture how it would work.
Yeah. Yeah, I know it's super hard because you think like what possibly could that matter? I mean, it could be like maybe a resonance thing, or maybe a purifying thing. Maybe it's if you make stuff to these sacred dimensions that it creates some kind of magic, like a magic purifier. I mean, it's just like people use these pyramid technologies to try and keep fruit from going bad and all this kind of stuff. I remember this guy came to this aerospace plant I was working in. He was an engine tester, actually. He was a turbine engine tester from LA County, I think. And it was just one of these weird conversations I had in like the late 90s with a dude who was into pyramid power, you know, and it was just like mind blowing.
I was wondering if you could like put apples in with something like that, if they'd be good for
Oh, yeah, he was talking about your razor, like you put your razor in the pyramid, like your metal pyramid, and the razor stays sharp longer. I mean, all kinds of crazy stuff like that.
I can't imagine. I mean, I know this is analog technology, right? So maybe you can compensate for wear and tear and damage, but like the pyramid is like a broken machine. It's pretty fucked up. It's like there's big cracks everywhere. Its skin was ripped off. I mean, who the hell knows how many thousands of years it's been through?
And who knows how important the skin was? I have a theory that like that skin and the dimensions of the actual skin and the type of material it is might have been the most important aspect of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So but people expect it to work. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I know it's analog. Again, it's not like everything's perfect or it's all broken, but still, I just feel like if you go in there and you feel something, are you supposed to feel it? Were people supposed to be inside it? I don't think so. I think it's like the inside of a car engine. Like, you're not supposed to be inside of a car engine.
Yeah, I say that all the time. I also say that because everyone's like, well, it resonates, bro. And I'm like, yeah, well, if you could like crawl through the big ship motor of a giant aircraft carrier and walk through one of the cylinder heads and just go like, well, I bet you that motherfucker will resonate fantastically.
Yeah, I know. And maybe that frequency is good for you, or maybe maybe it's not. I mean,
right.
I don't know. So when you talk about these things, it's like none of them are perfect. A lot of them are reconstructed, you know, very well glued back together, but some of them have cracks in them. They've been fixed. And even the ones that don't have chips, because some of these were literally used for at least 10,000 years, like used for, I don't know, like what do the textbooks say? Body oil? Maybe they were used for body oil.
Whatever they were used for, they were used.
Yeah. So they're, but it's granite, so it's hard. Okay. But there's plenty of wear and tear. And I think a lot of these, the bottom was perfectly pointed. So they were really balanced, like very well. Lots of them were. Now, a lot of them have been flattened out over time, and it almost looks like someone was trying to make it flat so that it would actually sit, because they're like, how am I supposed to use this thing? So all the evidence everywhere you look, a lot of it's anecdotal, but it all goes back to this wasn't made by the people that the books say they were made by. Not at that time, not by them, not for the reasons you're saying. But some of what's out there is correct. Like, I do think these are pre-dynastic or prehistoric, which is nice that we don't have to fight that battle.
Yeah, exactly. So what about the chain of custody? I mean, that's the big argument that people I see on X. Oh, the vases. These guys think the vases are like the chain. You know, it's like they're like, they just think it's I guess they're just these skeptical people are just their go-to is, oh, it's a modern fakery, or you know, who knows how long these people have really had these vases and stuff. But
yeah, I mean, for years we've been looking for people to be able to recreate these. There's just so few people that can work in granite or this medium, right? So you can't even really get people to volunteer. Ben put out something a few years ago. I don't know if he challenged his audience or some people were just attempting it. One guy like broke his arm because it was on a lathe, and I think something went flying, and then he had to say, no, please don't. But it's hard to find people that can create this today.
I mean, even a lathe, like even when you look at the lugs and the way that's made, I mean, I just don't even know how you would do it with a high-tech lathe, even, because the way it seems like if I seem to remember the scan of the full vase, like you'd have to stop the lathe and then mill that area in between the lugs, or you can't lathe all of it. So there has to be multi-processes happening. And how do you get it to that so accurate of a radius when you're using another process? It's not like you're just lathing something cylindrical to a certain radius. Like there's other things happening in there, right?
Yeah. There's probably multiple stages, right? But if you're polishing something, you know that if you focus on one point too much, you're going to create some sort of a divot or something. So it's possible that maybe maybe the lathe was only used for the polishing process. It's also, if you think about like Petri core number 7, where, it's speculated that, I think Chris and other people have shown that it was there were spiral grooves. So each successive turn, every rotation removed a lot more material than we could theoretically do with today's tools, like something like 500 more times more. So that's possibly one other explanation here, is like maybe it was rotated, but it wasn't spun at like 500 RPM. It was like very slowly rotated, only to get the geometry correct. But the tool was productive. It was like a really productive tool. Maybe it was resonating at the frequency of granite, or like a dentist drill does today, right? We use that for gemstone cutting and dentist drills. We find a resonant frequency of the material that you're trying to cut into, tune your tool to that frequency, and it slides in. Maybe that was being used. I don't know. But I don't think it was an abrasive instrument. You're not lining this up on a lathe and putting some cutting tool next to it. That would create just so much ridiculous friction and heat. You break your cutting tool, you'd shatter your granite, and you would not be able to ensure that consistency and tolerance down to 1/1000th of an inch. I don't think you could.
Yeah, it's I was gonna say it. It's almost like they're cutting it. It's not hard, and they've found a way to soften it, or it's not actually
a
mechanical process. It's more.
I've seen people speculate in terms of the stuff that was going on in Peru, that maybe the stone was somehow manipulated so that it could be cut and shaped easier, like all those rounded edges in Sacsayhuaman and others.
Yeah.
There was even some speculation that it was an organic compound from the Amazon that may have helped to soften the stone. I have no idea. I'm not suggesting that, but that would make more sense to me than putting it on a high RPM lathe.
Yeah. So can you show on some of these ones, these accurate ones, that the chain of custody goes back to like you do have some documentation that shows that people have had them for a number of years, right?
The ones that I and others have that we've been analyzing, there's provenance that shows when it was exported from Egypt. And because of the treaty process and the antiquities trade, people were always concerned about that. Like, I want to make sure I'm going to buy this thing, I'm going to make sure it's documented when I got it and where, because I don't want the government coming after it, right? So we do have that in a lot of cases. Most of the time it was a private collector who bought it off of a market somewhere in Egypt, or it was exported by some sort of dignitary, typically from Europe, an ambassador or something like that. And in certain cases, the provenance is kind of weak because the thing was bought for nothing. And I think in the beginning we were really concerned about that. But now I don't think we're as concerned about it, because there's just so many of these things around the world. And if you think this was done fraudulently, in the 1980s, when the thing was trading for $400, like, you think that someone made this and then made money on it, selling it for $400 and paying a broker fee and paying for insurance and shipping? Like, you're crazy. That's uneconomical, right? So I'm not too concerned about that, but we're also laser focused. This was always the plan from the beginning, was to work with academia and institutions to expand this work. So we started with private collections like mine and others, because we didn't have any other option. But now I think we've made enough progress where we've gotten some interest from some museums and other places. And so we hope to be continuing that over the summer into the fall, and then publishing at some point thereafter.
That's awesome. Is there anybody keeping an eye on the ground? And is there any boots on the ground keeping an eye for a fresh excavation that might have one of these that you can prove, like, hey, this is like a new grave that's opened up, like a new temple that was found, and here's these accurate vases that haven't been looked at since it was put in that grave? Who knows before that, but Yeah,
it's a really good question. I don't know when the last time these were found. Because you got so the Nakata excavations, there's big cemeteries, and there's like the whole town is built around them. So if you're going to excavate, you're going to be digging under someone's kitchen floor. And then you have all the stuff in Nubia, which is mostly flooded. So that's going to be tricky. The Saqqara is probably already been exploited. I don't know where you'd go to find these. Probably a new site that hasn't been found yet.
Yeah.
Or the people in Egypt, you know, they've been collecting these things for, I mean, families have been looting and keeping their own private warehouses for thousands of years.
But like Yusuf says, I mean, he says we've got enough now. We don't need to find anything more. You know.
He said that?
Yeah. He's like, we just need the science now. We just need the people. So
well, that's true. But to your point, it would be pretty cool because that would establish like it's obviously old. Oh, and maybe there's like, you know, limited amount of damage on it too.
yeah, exactly.
That could be, if it was in like pristine shape, that would be pretty amazing.
Yeah. And you could, you know, document the whole process and
Yeah.
Where can people find out more of this stuff? Is there someplace they can follow you? You on any social media? Do you have a website?
We do. The website will be built out probably in a few months. We're, you know, we've kept kind of a low profile just because we're interested in trying to get somewhere in academia, and we just wanted to fly under the radar, and we're still hoping to do that. But I'll be speaking at the Cosmic Summit in middle of June, and I think that'll probably be broadcast. It'll be I have a pretty long presentation, which I have, you know, less than half the time that we had tonight, so I'm going to have to shorten that up a little bit. But we will be releasing all of this stuff, and you know what we did from the beginning was through Ben's website. You can go to Uncharted X and you can download the STL files and some of the reports, which we made available to the public right away to help counter some of the early criticism, which was, you don't know what you're doing. No, we know what we're doing. Okay, all that criticism fell away. All the early criticism was, you know, you didn't measure this properly and blah, blah, blah. And once they were able to download the STL files, okay, this must be fake. Someone must have just made this. So the metrology is being done properly. It's just a question of, is everything fake everywhere? You know, are all artifacts fake? Well, no, there's hundreds of thousands of these things, right? They're not all fake. Is it possible that somebody faked it? Yeah, but like for what reason? To resell for like $2,000? That these things used to go for $2,000 a few years ago. They're much more now. Some of them were always a little bit more expensive, but you'd spend a lot more money making the damn thing than trying to resell it at Sotheby's or Christie's or whatever. They just weren't valuable. Everybody wanted statues of human heads and cats. You know,
is that something that you're going to, are you going to measure some of these granite statues? I mean, I'll never forget Ben first mentioning how some of these granite, and we saw some of them in Egypt. I mean, they seem so precise. Can you do some of those things as well, just to show like how, okay, this is hand carved supposedly, but this is older than the recent work that's less, the quality seems less, and yet, you know, these things are so accurate.
It's funny. I almost feel like they could have been more accurate. Like their skill was such that maybe they felt like humans are flawed and they're not perfectly symmetrical. So they left some features a little bit, you know, asymmetrical to sort of emulate that, but they're not quite as accurate in terms of, there's no perfect circles on a human face. Like the symmetry that Chris Dunn and others have drawn on that Ramses II statue, if you actually scan it and look at it up close, and a few people have, I have not, but a few people have, and they've shown that it's not as accurate as some of these vases.
Oh, okay.
However, it's also 50 times the size. It's much, much larger. These things are sometimes, you know, 50 or well over 100 feet tall. But I would say, you know, one thing I would point out is that if you set a robot up to do this, or to, let's just say, drill 40,000 holes, a millimeter, you know, 0.1 millimeters apart, and you give it a specific tolerance and you give it a path to travel, it's going to get fucked up very quickly. The vibration and the movement will just cause it to kind of get off track, and it'll make mistakes. You need a human constantly measuring and recalibrating and redialing everything in. And that could be the case here. It's like these could have been like guided tools where there's a human that's always involved, that's measuring, that's singing and trying to match a frequency. I have no idea, but I don't think you're just plugging this into a computer and walking away.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
When I see the statue, when I see those statues, I feel like it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life. It's like looking at me, and I'm like, whoever made this, these were the best of us ever.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. No matter how they did it.
No matter how they did it, these people were they were the best ever. They made the pyramids and they made this stuff. and maybe the statues too. I don't know, but they weren't like us. They were better in a lot of ways. I think I feel pretty convinced of that.
What's your speculation on that? Does it go back pre Younger Dryas? Like, does it go back to pre? You know. Yeah.
So if we know that some of these are in Nubia, let's use the logic of the archaeologists. All right, we find this form in a 14,500 year tomb. Therefore, they all are. That's their own logic, right? These vessels were found back then, therefore they all must be that old. And so if they're at least that old, that's basically, so 12. So it's before Younger Dryas, I think, right?
Yeah.
That's right before the Younger Dryas, and the last ice age ended. Why would it stop there? Why would that be the time where they were all made? So it's probably older than that. I think all this stuff is older than 10,000 BC. A lot of it. Not all, I don't mean to say all this stuff like generically, but the precision stuff, the really impressive pyramids, maybe the statues, definitely some of this stuff. I think it's older than 10,000 BC.
Yeah.
I would tend to agree. Well, Adam, this has been great. I mean, I'm gonna get the Go Pass, so I'll be able to watch your presentation on the computer. But Graham will be there. He'll come check it out in person, and I'm looking forward to that. It's gonna be weird if the vases are the thing that breaks the camel's back. After all this, it won't be the pyramids, it won't be the Sphinx, it'll just be the vases. Boom! It's like, all right, you guys win. High society.
I don't think there's as much pushback as there used to be, because what you guys were saying in the beginning, like the new crowd, the new generations taking over, they're not tied down to the same dogmas that their grandparents were,
Yeah.
So, and they want to make money. And
science only moves forward one funeral at a time. So there's been a few funerals probably.
Yeah. So a couple generations in and out, and then things change. And as long as we stick to the scientific method is the key. And so if we're wrong, we need to admit it. And if we're right, we continue down the path and keep an open mind. I don't really know what we're going to find, but I think we've seen enough to know, statistically speaking, that some of the stuff, it's just not possible to do this by hand. It's really not.
Yeah.
It's just really not. And you also can't really prove that too, because there's no definition of like what tolerance is possible by human hand. But you talk to any machinist, talk to any engineer, they'll tell you, no effing way. But it's not like, it's not a thing. There's not a number,
If you put enough time into it, you never know, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
But
which means they're even more valuable, which means it's even more unlikely that 100,000 were dropped underground.
Yeah, but I mean, doing it by hand with these radial traversal patterns, I mean, that seems unlikely. Following some weird design calculation is,
Well, the funny thing is the mathematics and there's other things, like some of these are ellipsoid, where there's like basically a quadratic equation kind of defines the body, and that's interesting in and of itself. I mean, look that up. It's supposed to have been invented in like 500 AD. So there's a whole bunch of ways you can go down this path. Disproving traditional like mathematical theory is one, where half the stuff that's out there was really stolen by the Egyptians to begin with, and I think you can probably prove that. So I think there's a lot of work that can be done by a lot of different people here. But it's great. It's great to see people interested in this stuff. It was tough for a while.
Yeah. That's good.
I bet. Well, Adam, this has been great. Like I say, we'll do the Cosmic Summit thing. Graham will see you there, but I'm eager to keep sort of chasing this thing down and maybe do another show down the road as the breakthroughs keep coming.
Absolutely. And I'll share you guys on everything I can as soon as we can. You'll be the first to hear about it.
Awesome. Thanks.
Perfect.
Appreciate it.
Adam. Have a great night.
All right. Thanks, guys.
See ya.
And that was a chat with Adam Young, Precise Ancient Artifacts. I never picked up the Precise Ancient Artifacts. I wasn't sure what we were going to get into by the title.
Oh.
I was thinking more megalithic, but or maybe what we didn't get into. I guess he doesn't want to get into it anyway, but I mean, not with the academia stuff, but all the like oompas. Remember, was it the oompas, the out of place artifacts?
Oh yeah, the upas. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's all this like weird little gears and stone and all these weird little things that supposedly come from millions of years ago, even. So who knows? Who knows? Maybe it's all vapor canopy stuff. Vapor canopy. Of course, that's big thanks to Adam for coming on the show. Big thanks to you guys for listening. It's the 11-year anniversary show. So 657 episodes. It was 3 days ago, I think, was our technical 11-year anniversary. So this is coming out on that day. If you guys want to head over to Grimerica.ca/support, sign up for a monthly or make a one-time donation. It's time to catch up with that support. Become a member over at Grimerica and help us keep moving the work forward, moving the interviews forward. I think we'll hit 700 this year, right? Maybe not. We might not. This is that'll be 43 more. So we'll hit it before our next anniversary, though.
Yeah.
So anyway, big thanks to you guys for listening. Big thanks to Adam for coming on the show. Head over to GrimericaOutlaw.ca for other podcasts. If you want to check that kind of stuff out, head over to adultbrain.ca for all the audiobooks. That Egyptian Book of the Dead Graham was talking about, that'll be out soon everywhere you get your audiobooks. So check that out. Contact at the cabin for the trips. Other than that, we love you guys. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.